This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
It's scary to think that, we do have one of the remaining what is supposed to be centre-left governments in the world, and they're this brittle and cowardly, and this is the way they react to the Australian community watching something horrific happen. This is politics.
If you want the doll for life, free marijuana, vote Greens.
There's a bunch of ratbags and a bunch of idiots, and I got no time.
The Greens get way too good a run in the Australian media, way too free a run.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger.
Hello everybody, it is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. You already know this. It's produced by Michael the Griffin. I'm Tom Ballard, coming to you from Boorloo, Perth in Whadjuk Noongar country. And this week, I'm delighted to welcome back a returning star as our guest, Emerald. She's a proud Widjable woman from the Bundjalung Nations. She joined us on our show around about this time of year, this wonderful time of year, in 2024, back when she was the CEO of GetUp. She's changed jobs recently. She's doing some other stuff. Lovely to see you. Welcome back to the show, Larissa Baldwin-Roberts. Hello.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. It's a weird time of the year.
Yes. Happy? No, there's no happy about it.
Happy.
But it's no happy. Normally / put on everything else that's fucking happening in this world. If you don't mind filling in for us, yes, you are no longer the CEO of GetUp. You finished up there last year, I believe. You're now at something called Common Threads. To the extent that you feel comfortable talking about it, can you explain to us why you finished up at GetUp and what's the kind of new work that's filling your days these days?
Yeah, so, I feel like I haven't really talked about leaving GetUp, but I did leave GetUp. I left GetUp pretty quietly, in the last year. I think there's a lot of things you can talk about. I was at GetUp for nearly 7 years, started First Nations campaigning there, developed out one of the largest First Nations campaigns teams, but I think there's a part of it is where is the state of politics right now? And, when I originally took on the role of being the CEO of one of the largest political organizations in the country, it wasn't really my aspiration to be a CEO of a big NGO. In fact, it was kind of post that, the election, there was a lot of turnover within the team. NGOs post George Floyd, and thinking about racism, thinking about intersectionality. But it was kind of what was popular then and what people were talking about. But I feel like we went into the cost of living crisis in a really big way. We were coming out of the pandemic and right across sectors, we've seen enormous amounts of turnover and stuff like that. So really was handed this role of GetUp, and I think it's an important organization. I'm proud of the work that we've done there, but I think you need to be a certain type of person to be leading an NGO, and my focus and my skill set and everything that I have and my commitment is for First Nations people and our communities. And it was a role that took me far away from that work in a way that was I guess I couldn't juggle within, my personal life and my personal commitment and my responsibility to community. So it just meant I was basically at all times doing two jobs because you don't get to turn off being a black fella, especially when you work in and around such big systemic issues that our communities are facing. When you are a black fella that's working in an organisation with resource, when you're able to pool resources, whether that's politically, philanthropically, thinking about connecting grassroots communities to the type of political action and change that's required. So for me, I was always going to be a transitional CEO, and I don't think a lot of people are okay with that, but that's fine. I think for me, I want to be in a place where I can make the most impact, and GetUp is an incredible organization, and it's over 20 years old now. And I think for me, where we are post-referendum and taking stock of everything that's happened, even thinking about the things that we're coming into with this year, I feel like we need to focus on movement building around First Nations justice and racism within this country. And Common Threads, the other thing I would say, is the organisation that I'm actually leading at the moment. But Common Threads has actually existed for about 6 years, and it existed as a collective of First Nations campaigners working across kind of mainstream NGOs in a way for us to work directly with community under a more self-determined banner, and focus on, particularly since you may remember kind of the forced closures and that sort of stuff that were happening in WA. And really what we were focused on coming in out of that is there are a lot of young mob that were coming into advocacy and coming into campaigning and just didn't have a lot of skills. And, when you actually move into the NGO space, you meet incredible people with these just just academic backgrounds and a lot of, they have the resource to kind of build across the NGO sector and that sort of stuff in terms of they come from middle-class families or very wealthy families. And so we don't have that kind of resource. And so we spent a lot of time over the last 6 years working on collective community strategies, helping to build up the capacity of young people, helping Black organizations help fund the advocacy work that they're doing, and trying to, get more people into the movement. And so I think coming out of the referendum in 2023 and really looking at what is a really well-funded anti-Indigenous rights movement within this country, it was just like a no-brainer. We have to focus on our own communities. We need to think about movement building. What we've seen during the referendum campaign, not just the incredible amount of racism that was targeted at our communities, but we've seen a lot of governments at state and federal level walk away from our communities. And just kind of left our communities in the wake. And I think that, in so many ways, politically, we're still there. We're not having the level of commitment that we require. But I think we need to focus, and we need to focus on movement building. And one of the other things that I really reflected on coming out of the referendum across the NGO sector, which I was talking about George Floyd before, but this kind of global reckoning with racism, is that it was skin deep. People didn't really understand what they were doing. It was a lot of performance. And in terms of what actual people needed to be supported in their jobs and support First Nations communities on the front line, the actual commitment and skill level isn't there. And so, you can fight with the NGOs around how we do this and trying to convince them that blackfellas can win and the things that we want to campaign on will make this country better for everybody. Or you can kind of build a movement and bring in the people that want to work with us and focus our energies there. So for me, moving over to Common Threads is a First Nations Justice Initiative. We work across rights country people, looking at climate and country, particularly looking at the preparation for treaties right across this country, but looking at systems change. That's what we need. That's what blackfellas are good at. And so, that's where we are now. We've spent a year or 18 months of really solidly building it. And it's based on, I guess, a lot of feminist principles around if you want to build power and want to have power for your communities, then you have to formalize those structures. So that's why Common Threads has gone from being a collective to an NGO with an incredible board and a really deadly team.
Yeah, nice. Commonthreads.org.au is the website if people want to find out more. And I want to talk to you more about First Nations rights and the fight, particularly around this National Day that we'll be experiencing tomorrow after this show comes out. Just back on when you say a well-funded anti-Indigenous rights campaign, I mean, are you in part talking about Advance? Because I remember we all laughed at Advance being the right-wing GetUp. It's like, ha, 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 they're silly. It's still very hard to figure out how seriously to take Advance because though they claim a lot of wings and talk a lot of big games and certainly have a shitload of money, it's very hard to draw a direct line to their political wins. And if you look at the 2025 election, you'd say in many ways they ate shit. But heaps of money, seems like a level of energy and a level of being taken seriously by conservative forces. I mean, how do you view Advance as the bizarro, evil version of GetUp in Australia?
My favourite timing of Advance is when they came out with that Captain GetUp with the, very amazing, the superhero. It's just very problematic.
I remember that. That was great. And people were like, hang on, you're making fun of GetUp? Because he looks like a superhero and he's GetUp, so he seems good. What are you going for here?
I mean, the funny thing is that Advance more broadly is not a pimple of on the arse of an organisation like GetUp, regardless of how I feel about it at the moment, or more broadly the left and the movement building that we do, and the people that are really in there doing, we have people, we are social movement builders, we have values, and the reality is I don't think they're a very talented organisation. The issue that I have when I talk about the anti-Indigenous rights movement, and the reason I don't say Advance, is because the reality is that we've seen a lot of very wealthy people come in and fund that No campaign. A lot of billionaires, a lot of people who have an issue with the advancement of Indigenous rights in this country. You think about people like Gina Reinhardt, and I think sometimes we let them go in terms of the role of people like Rupert Murdoch, and we obscure the actual vitriol and hate that they direct towards our communities and these big corporations, because they are doing it for profit. And so when I say an anti-Indigenous rights movement, yes, Advance is well funded by them, and we know the IPA. The IPA has been set up since the land rights movement in opposition to that. Its roots are in pushing back against us. But also we had, there's been a lot of talk this year about the kind of Turning Point USA. They were over here in the lead up to the referendum. Tucker Carlson was here in the lead up to the referendum. So it is a global movement. And when people think about why you would attack First Nations people, and even to the point of neo-Nazis in the streets over last year, who ran from their neo-Nazi rally and attacked Chem sovereignties? Do you know what I mean? People are not connecting the dots. So that's why I don't want to give Advance more credit than they deserve, because they're not that great. But they are giving legitimacy in so many ways and contributing to how people talk about First Nations people in this country. So I think it's wider than that. And it was one of my bigger things around being within the leadership of the and I still am within leadership of the NGO sector and the social civil society and that sort of stuff. And I feel good about being within that place. But I think sometimes we're not clear-eyed around the forces that are moving against us. And we look at things that are happening in the US or what's just been happening in Switzerland at Davos, and you're just hang on a minute, the stuff that people like Mark Carnage said around the world order being alive, and you're just being gaslit forever, right? But this is real, and we need to take it seriously, and we need to think about the people we're trying to protect, the future we're trying to create, and how we get there. And so that's why I say the anti-Indigenous rights movement, because it's a real thing.
It's a broad rainbow coalition of people hating and standing against the rights of First Nations people. Yeah. Great. Well, I can't wait to get into all of this with you. Of course, we are going to be reviewing another batshit week in Australian politics. Again, it's not even fucking January 26th and Australia's already gone crazy. These hate speech laws were passed. The coalition has broken up again. And yes, ahead of January 26th, Invasion Day. We'll get into more about the fight for First Nations justice in this country with Larissa. Very briefly, bit of show admin. If you want to support this show, we'd really appreciate it if you became a patron, a danger dog, patreon.com/seriousdangerau. We released a patrons only episode this week, myself and Emerald Moon, discussing the politics of alcohol. Is alcohol stopping the revolution? Should we nationalize the pubs? These were the big issues that we got into. Really interesting conversation. If you just pay $3 a month to support the show, you can listen to it. Also, indulge me, but a big thank you to the Danger Dogs who came out to see my show in Perth at the Fringe. On the day this comes out, I've got one show left at the Oasis Comedy Club, and then Be Funny Challenge Impossible tours right across the country. Details at comedy.com.au. And finally, this is the last time I'll mention it, but my dumb play about the gay and lesbian kingdom of the Coral Sea Islands is on this coming week at Midsummer Festival at Gasworks Theatre in Melbourne. All the details in the show notes. I'd love you to come along to that. The end.
Then I'm sure to get a brain, a heart, a home.
Can I start with what the legislation does? It does a number of things. Well, I'm not going to get into it's not hypotheticals about what can and can't be said.
Oh, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
All right, let's get into it. Great news, everyone. Hatred is over. Australia has been cured of all hatred thanks to the wonderful legislative moves in the Parliament this week. On Tuesday night, the Labor government and the Liberals teamed up. Remember when Labor and Liberals get together? That's bipartisanship. That's great. If the Greens ever vote the same way as the Liberals, of course, that's teaming up and evil. They teamed up to pass the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026, which was rushed through Parliament at a breakneck speed and, of course, is apparently designed to combat anti-Semitism in the wake of the horrific Bondi terror attack. The laws have been criticised by various civil liberties groups, legal experts and multicultural groups, including the Jewish Council of Australia, with particular concern from the left that the laws could well criminalise peaceful protest and legitimate criticism of Israel. Though, to be fair, our good friends at the IPA were out there campaigning against these hate speech laws. I believe even the crazy Australian Jewish Association, which is one of the more unhinged peak Jewish body groups, or at least a group that claims to speak for Jewish Australians, was against these laws. The Greens, One Nation, Senators David Pocock, Fatima Payman, Tammy Tyrrell, Ralph Babbitt, and Liberal Alex Antic joined the Nationals in voting against the bill. That was a big deal. The Nationals abstained from voting on the laws in the lower house, actually voted against it in the Senate. The Greens were initially negotiating with the government to try and make some version of these hate laws pass, but eventually came out strongly against them. Greens Justice spokesperson David Shoebridge, whose party voted against the measures, said there were real concerns the laws would target political criticism, particularly from those who opposed Israel's actions in Gaza. We couldn't support the hate speech laws because the government hasn't said what conduct they want to ban, which groups they want to ban, or who they're targeting, he said. It would have been reckless. It would have been a sort of betrayal of the basic sense of democracy to ram through legislation last night with such broad-ranging impacts when every legal expert we spoke to said it was reckless and dangerous and they didn't know the scope of it. We'll get to the political fallout in a moment, but I suppose I'm just interested, Larissa, what have you made of this whole debate, this debacle around these hate speech laws and how our political class has approached this issue?
I mean, it's always worrying when you see Australian politicians talking about anything that comes in some sort of close proximity to racism, because this is not a country who knows or understands or is willing to deal with racism. And so it's one of those things that's like, you kind of lean in and you're like, what do you mean by that? And the reality is like, they're playing for political favor right now. Like, there has been the enormous amount of politicking around what was the Bondi attacks. Like, that was horrific. And to watch not just Australian politicians come out, but I was watching kind of live news because I have problems, but I was watching US-based news. There'd been a shooting at Brown, and then I was seeing these different chyrons come up around what was happening. And I was like, wait, what the hell is happening here? And toggling back and forth. But it was insane to me how quickly it makes sense because it was an attack on the Jewish community, and people are very but it was like kind of before we knew what was happening, you seen like Netanyahu coming out and making comment and stuff like that. And then just, Pauline Hanson coming down to the memorial and all these types of things. Like, there's nothing good that can come of this. The hate speech laws, I think, in the way that Australia discusses racism is around how do we maintain our comfort. It's not about protecting people because they have no ability to, they don't enforce these types of things, right? Like, we see constantly the amount of vitriol that happens within our media targeted at First Nations community. So it makes me angry because I feel like anti-Semitism is real, absolutely. And it deserves the focus of our politicians, but it is not the only form of racism. And I think when we, in the last 2 years, the way that we have seen so much focus on anti-Semitism, and it is rising, it obscures how other people are being hurt and harmed and discriminated against, and how racism is affecting our communities. I think that, and it creates this kind of like this ceiling that we can't move through. Like, even thinking about I think the last 12 months, like, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have made up a third of all deaths in custody. Like, deaths in custody are going up. We're seeing just over in WA a few weeks ago, like end of last year, another young fella getting, chased by somebody on a motorbike. We've seen what happened to Elijah. Like, the amount of attacks on young people in WA, and it was like this country kind of creates this cognitive dissonance around what is politically correct and what's okay and what people feel comfortable with. And they kind of forget about the live examples, like what is the difference between what's happening here and lynching of people during, slavery within the US and before, even in and around the civil rights movement and stuff like that. I think we see a lot of really harmful stuff happening here, and the government's not willing to have a real conversation. And, these laws, I don't think they're going to make a lot of change. I am really worried around how this creates a role to over-police and over-surveil our communities. And I say this in a way of, like, I'm not just being hysterical about it. Like, I remember in post-Elijah Wood, people saying this is a race riot, right? I remember, think about Palm Island and what people said about Palm Island in the riots around Doomadgee's murder, and, how police reacted to First Nations communities across Queensland, even, threatening to strike if Chris Hurley was put under investigation. So the idea that what marginalised communities experience and what we know about policing particularly and racism is that the rest of the country doesn't have these experiences in the same way. I'm not saying not everyone, but it's a different experience. And for them to rush through these laws without even a conversation with First Nations people felt pretty disgusting. And, it's on one hand, you want to have sympathy, and you do have sympathy for, I can understand absolutely that the Jewish community feels an enormous amount of fear. But do you know who also feels fearful in their own country? Our communities. Go and walk in Queensland and go up to the Northern Territory and WA and see how people feel about the increase of violence, or even in last year in Victoria, talking to the mob that are working around the treaty and stuff like that, and how threatened they felt to celebrate this thing because of the rise of neo-Nazis and how much they were going to be attacked. And that's not just about, hate groups. It's also enabled by politicians and media. So, who are these laws for? How do they target people? Our communities are already over-policed, and I don't have any faith in them. I think it's going to create an enormous amount of trouble for our communities.
Man, it's so tough, right? Like, again, I feel like I'm going crazy. You don't want to be in a position in which you want to come across as if you're minimizing any kind of racism or discrimination or pitting groups against each other. Like, to me, the only sensible and rational and compassionate and politically smart approach is to take an anti-racism approach across the board, right? But we have forces who, in response to these attacks and to response to the past couple of years, are saying, no, fuck that. Anti-Semitism is the worst and the number one priority when it comes to racial hatred in this country. Julian Leeser, the Liberal MP, will say, no Islamophobia. Like, we're not worrying about that. We are only talking about anti-Semitism. In the condolence motion this week in Parliament, he got up and said that anti-Semitism is the fundamental threat to this nation. This was how he described it. Now, again, you absolutely want to have complete compassion for members of the Jewish community who must feel terrified. Anti-Semitism, as you say, is real, and we saw the horrific, evil anti-Semitic violence, result in the death of those 14 people on the beach of Bondi in December of last year. It's all horrific. But then, yes, to bring some level of sanity into this and say racism across the board, discrimination across the board is terrible, is real for lots of different groups. And surely a compassionate country is someone who can say that and take that position without being accused of minimizing or dismissing the concerns of any one particular group in this country.
It's not just about compassion. This is a country that does not grapple with its history. It tries to exist in a space of, colonization, and we've moved on, and this is who this country is, and you have created a farcity because you're saying the average person within this country doesn't understand the murder and massacre and mayhem that happened in the lead up to what became modern day Australia. Doesn't understand how those historic injustices lead to more modern day oppression and dispossession of our own communities. And so a country that can't get that right can't grapple with these big issues, right? And I think you also have to say is that we have to call out naked politicization for what it is as well. This is about a government and, a coalition. I don't know what the hell we call them now, but the opposition that's on the brink, right? They're fighting for their very survival. And what they're trying to do is in so many ways signal to the same group of people, which are not the people who are, in terms of our communities affected by racism and discrimination, but they're trying to to signpost to other people, not marginalized people, but other people within the community, that it's okay for you to be like that. The rise of people saying it's okay to be white. I'm like, please tell me when it was not okay to be white, because it just
when it's really sunny, Larissa, when the sun's out, it's actually not okay to be white.
That's not my problem.
It's very dangerous. Okay, and I would ask you to have some compassion for my people.
Yeah, well, you got to have melanin if you didn't migrate from other places that didn't need melanin. Okay, it's fine.
That's probably fair.
But this the piece of it, right, is it just is so political. And the terrifying thing is that this is real. We had a mass shooting. Australians everywhere, regardless of your religion, your race, where you came from, that's terrifying. It's not something that we experience within this country in the same way. We experience an enormous amount of violence within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. who perpetuate it from the state. And when you talk to ordinary Australians about that, the kind of shock of the disparity in lived experience, like we can't talk about policing because most people in this country have good experience with policing. Police are who you call when you have a problem. Like, I wish our communities could call the police when they have a problem, but they have to weigh up how this is going to go down, what this effect is going to have on their family, and what type of whether or not you're going to have a liaison officer come, whether this thing is going to blow out of control. So, it's frustrating, and it's frustrating when you take a step back and think about kind of where we are on a global scale and what's happening in this world. And it's scary to think that, we do have one of the remaining, what is supposed to be, centre-left governments in the world. And they're this brittle and cowardly, and this is the way they react to the Australian community watching something horrific happen. This is politics.
Yeah, some people were digging up some old classic tweets from Mr. Albanese back in 2019 when he was in opposition about Labor will always support the right to protest, and journalism is not a crime, and Scott Morrison is terrible, he's suppressing free speech, and now here we are. I mean, go into these details a little bit more. There's a great piece from Anne Toomey writing in The Conversation. I'm sure people are familiar with Anne Toomey. She's a big constitutional expert, and she sort of went through these laws and had a look at how they might affect things like the right to protest and our freedom of speech. And it's worth just sort of going through this detail just a little bit, if you'll indulge me. So she asks, how can a group become a prohibited hate group under these laws? A prohibited group can be prohibited under the new law if the Governor-General makes a regulation prohibiting it. The Governor-General acts on the advice of the Minister for the Australian Federal Police. There are a number of conditions that must be met before a group can be banned. First, the Minister must be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the group has engaged in conduct constituting a hate crime or has been associated with a hate crime by preparing, planning, assisting, or advocating engaging in such conduct. This is the initial trigger for banning a group. Secondly, the Minister must be satisfied that banning the group is reasonably necessary to protect the Australian community from social, economic, psychological, and physical harm. The bill was altered to water down this requirement in two ways. It now also applies to protecting part of the Australian community from such harm. In addition, it says this social, economic, psychological, and physical harm can simply be the continued presence in Australia of the group that is engaged in or been associated with the conduct constituting a hate crime. The Minister would therefore have little difficulty being satisfied of this second condition. The third condition is that the Minister must have received advice from the Director-General of Security, who's the head of ASIO, recommending consideration of banning the group. The Director-General must be satisfied the group has engaged in activities that are likely to increase the risk of politically motivated violence or communal violence and has either itself advocated for or engaged in such violence, or there is a risk that it may do so in the future. In addition, the Minister must get the Attorney-General's agreement to ban the group and arrange a briefing for the opposition leader about it. Any regulation banning a group could be disallowed, that is, overturned by either House of Parliament. So, sorry, that was a lot of detail, but Anne Toomey's sort of making the point there. There's like, okay, there are a lot of steps. There are a lot of tests that you need to meet in order to ban a group under these new laws. But it's not like we are not currently seeing governments across the world pull some pretty crazy legal rabbits out of the hat in order to appease sentiments from powerful voices, particularly the pro-Israel lobby or a right-wing media, to do some pretty wild stuff, particularly the UK, all right, in which Palestine Action, a non-violent group that did some criminal damage on a military site where jets were being used to partake in Israel's genocide in Gaza. I think they cost about $1 million worth of damage or something like that. Didn't hurt anybody. No actual violence committed against anybody in the services of trying to stop a genocide that the UK was complicit in. Palestine Action Group gets listed as a terrorist organisation, and now well over 100, maybe dozens and dozens and dozens of people are being arrested by British police for holding up a sign saying, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action. That is, under the law, considered supporting a terrorist group. Have you followed much of that conversation in the UK, and like, is this kind of listing of a hate group thing quite concerning to you?
It's pretty concerning, and I have, globally we work with a lot of Indigenous organisations and, liberation and Black justice organisations as well as Palestinian organisations here. And we've seen over the years is like whether you have foreign interference and all this sort of stuff. Like, I for sure think that I had an ASIO profile for the work that I've done for many years around protests. Going back over a decade, working on Invasion Day. I remember when Invasion Day, we would march into like a wall of 150 cops here in Brisbane with it, that was over a decade ago. I remember the policing that we had on the back of, remember the forced closures rallies and stuff like that. So there's a lot of reasons why our communities, the longest running protest in Australia is the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. Like, absolutely frontline activists are would satisfy the, being previously under the watch of ASIO or police and that sort of stuff. Also, the other thing that they don't tell you, they don't make visible, is like, oh yeah, there's always this, like, yeah, but that's also secret. You don't tell people when you're, looking at them into these things. You don't tell the community that we're thinking of investigating this group for X, Y, Z. And then there's obvious reasons for that in some places, but like, where's the ability for us to say that's our democratic freedoms and rights, and we have an ability and a right to do this? Like, there has been almost an entire crackdown on protests right across, well before what happened on October 7th and the rise of really large Palestinian rallies for their liberation and against genocide. So I worry about what this means in terms of our ability to have the type of political discourse that a free and fair democracy requires. And I also think, like, I was watching the other day the ADL in the US, which are particularly an egregious organisation, and they were talking about, the thing that you were saying around Julian Lisa, and like this is, and they say that there was a scourge in the report, like in the rise in anti-Semitism. There is a rise in anti-Semitism, but also there is like a really sophisticated ability to report any like in the US around the ADL. If you like for something like if you have a young Jewish kid who's going to school and someone says something to you about this is what Blatt was saying for the ADL, like says something to them about protest or something like that, then you can make a complaint that that's not that's not acceptable, and then that goes through an AI sorter and goes directly to 50. They have a list of 50,000 lawyers to start legal proceedings against that teacher. And you're just like, yeah, I don't know the black was even reading the cops or like, who do we complain to, right? So there is also that we need to be honest around what is really sophisticated politicization, because let's be honest, like where Israel finds itself right now. And that's about a foreign government trying to curry favour in order for us to allow weapons and funding to go over to fund a genocide. And we're not okay with that. And that's the reality of like, yes, but we need to separate those two things out, and we need to be able to criticise and have a really, a political debate. And it's not just about how people feel about the kind of violence and wars that we see in 4K every day on our screens, but it's also about there's a finite federal resource really in terms of what we pay as taxpayers, and we have a right to have a conversation about where that goes. And like, I don't want to see it. I can think of 100 things that you could fund before you fund foreign wars. Or because like it's crazy to be in this space of like a new age of FI building or something, and it's like
mixed in with AI surveillance as well. I would not be surprised if if there are like at some point an anti-AUKUS organization will be listed as a hate group, because you hate this country's security and our beautiful defense forces and the defense industry. So
then I'm going to
listed as a hate
definitely be on that list again. Like, AUKUS is such bullshit. I really hope. My hope is like Donald Trump is such a fragile little annoying to say what, but like I hope it is something that we do really pisses him off when he tears up AUKUS. That's my hope. Just you guys.
It's a bad deal. Just going to the Orwellian nature of these laws again, back to Toomey's piece. To complicate matters, the Act says that no crime need actually have been committed and no one needs to have been convicted. In addition, conduct can be a hate crime even though it happened in the past when it wasn't a crime. It is enough for the minister to be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the group has engaged in or been associated with the conduct constituting a hate crime. This leaves it up to the minister to decide what was done and by whom, whether they had the necessary intent, whether their conduct can be attributed to the group, whether any defences apply, and whether the conditions of the law of the relevant jurisdiction have been met. Ordinarily, we leave such assessments to independent courts and judges. For example, should a minister be the one deciding whether a defence of acting in good faith should apply when the minister has a political interest in banning a particular group? It should also be worth clarifying there is no right of appeal here. There's a specific provision in these laws that have just passed our parliament literally saying no procedural fairness. There will be no right of review. If you're a part of an organisation, let's say Palestine Action Sydney, who suddenly finds themselves listed as a hate group, sorry, that's the end of the story. No appeals for you. Good stuff.
I mean, one part of my brain is like, well, then how far back these laws are going to go? But it's scary stuff. It's not. It doesn't make us a better country. It doesn't make us a safer country.
Yeah.
I don't know who sees these laws and feels like, even that procedural fairness is one of those wonky things that people are like, oh, yeah, whatever, but it matters.
Yeah.
And the right to appeal, like it's the cornerstone of kind of like liberal democracies.
Murderers have the right to appeal under our criminal justice system, okay? For convicted murderers, convicted rapists, people do terrible things. We generally agree that a legal system that provides some element of appeal or review to a point, obviously, you can't appeal something forever through our criminal justice system, but we at least say, okay, if we're dealing with people's lives here and pretty serious consequences and presumably being listed as a hate group would, we're talking about jail terms of up to 5, 10 or 15 years as punishments for these laws, it would be kind of cool if there was the option for people to appeal those decisions or have them reviewed by another body. That's kind of the whole liberal justice system that I know is often bullshit and enacts horrible violence, particularly on First Nations people in this country. But at least in theory, that's kind of the principle we're going for, And speaking of the law, Senator Lydia Thorpe tried to introduce an amendment to these laws saying, as per the judgment of the federal court in Wertheim versus Haddad, criticism of the practices, policies and acts of the State of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces or Zionism is not inherently criticism of Jewish people and is protected by political speech and not hate speech, okay? I believe Fatima Payman also tried to pass an amendment to the similar effect, sort of saying, let's put into this law a really explicit provision or an acknowledgement of decisions made through our criminal justice system, through the courts, that anti-Zionism, criticism of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic, and we can have those two things separated and understood under law. And that amendment was completely rejected by the major parties. So they had the opportunity in passing these laws. We sort of said, hey, we could have cleared up any doubt here and made it clear that we protect people's right to speak, particularly in the context of a genocide and the ability to criticize the actions of Israel. And the major party said, absolutely not. No, we want to keep that ambiguity. Thank you. So,
no, I think good on them. This is the reason that we need independence in our government, in our parliament, to expose the hypocrisy and the actual, what's actually happening here with our politicians and what they're actually trying to do. Like, this is rubbish, and it's really scary, and it's going to affect a lot of people that, for a lot of it's based around, there's hate speech, and then how far does this played into just like, Hillary Clinton's line around like the deplorables of like, we know that a bunch of politicians don't like climate protesters, they don't like justice protesters, they don't like unions, and wrap it under a banner of hate because we don't actually know what hate crimes are, and we don't have any proper protection around that sort of stuff. And also the other thing is we don't have a spine around that stuff either. Because you're like, we don't want to upset. Like, just like the amount of people when we had the neo-Nazi rallies and that sort of stuff last year, it was actually funny watching. It was like, I'd never seen, like, January 26th now, because our protest is so big and the organising is so good, and it's such a diversity of people that turn out to it, we now get the type of coverage that actually marks the day on January 26th in a way that people have to talk about what's happening across the country because there's nothing else happening really. But I remember watching some of the March for Australia rallies when they had Thomas Sewell and stuff like that out the front of the march. And I think it was on the ABC or when there was another channel that kind of covered it like this, where they had the neo-Nazi girls in front just saying stuff, and you could pay into the protests and watch and see the kind of discomfort and disquiet of people who just like, hang on a minute, what is this? And just like dabbling with these hate speech laws and like thinking about groups is like, these groups don't have a membership, like ideologies and things like that. So like, how do innocent people, because you could see within that even, people who are pretty misguided and really thinking and not really thinking through this zero-sum politics and who's going to get hurt by it, and, really have any intelligent view on immigration in this country and what it's meant and what it's done for this country. But they're like, oh, well, that's a bit uncomfortable. And you could just seem like, oh, I don't agree with that piece of it. But that coverage, there's like barely any condemnation that came out for that. And they're going to be there in force.
Indeed. Well, the National Socialist Network disbanded ahead of these laws. I hear that Thomas Sewell, that racist piece of shit, is now fundraising to try and raise money to challenge the constitutional validity of these laws. So I guess. But
it's just like they disbanded. Racism exists. Like, how are you combating the radicalization of, like, even to the point of like what was really disgusting in seeing on the back of the Bondi attack is just like the idea that all these politicians came out and said that protests was basically the catalyst for ISIS's ideology. You're just like, no, that's not a link that exists. And if you're like actually being honest about what happened, that's disgusting to say that. The idea that coming out and protesting and talking about what is happening to your families in Gaza, or what our dollars are you being used for in terms of funding this sort of stuff, and saying that these protests led to people taking a violent and extreme action because they're associated with ISIS. Like, if you want to come out and say we're going to fund all this de-radicalization, and we know we need to have better, like, not targeting, but better understanding of how this is happening, because radicalization is happening online. It's been happening online for a really long time. And like, answer that question for the Australian public. Like, why didn't you know about this? And what can you do so we know that, like, that we're safe, that it's safe to gather in public spaces? Like, it's just that's too hard. So we're going to do this other thing.
Well, this is it. I mean, it's been remarkable, the absolute lack of conversation about these hate speech laws and their relationship to what happened in the Bondi attack, right? Like, there's been so little effort to explain we needed these laws, or if we'd had these laws prior to December 14th, it would have made a serious dent. It would have done something serious to stopping what happened on that particular day. Now, the gun laws were passed. They were eventually put together as an omnibus bill. They were split, and the Greens supported the gun laws. I've said before on this podcast, I don't shed a lot of tears or consider the civil liberties of gun owners that much. I just think guns are very powerful and deadly, and they should be highly regulated. And to the extent that regulations over our guns were loosened in the past 20 years since the Port Arthur massacre, we should absolutely tighten them up and get rid of loopholes. I think that's totally fine. That's like a good example of a material change to address what actually happened at Bondi.
And the other thing is, I feel the same way. I'm glad that the gun laws have been tightened up. I have the amount of domestic violence that is on the rise in this country. Get rid of them. I don't care.
Yeah, that's totally fine. But yeah, to your point, White Rose Society, who are great anti-fascist researchers, I'm sure people have seen a lot of their work, they posted all of this regarding the hate speech laws and not a single cent of funding towards community-based de-radicalization programs, support groups for families of radicalized people, harm reduction, anti-racist and respectful relationships programs in schools, etc. State oppression is apparently the only answer. I mean, just, again, coming back to the question of what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here, and how do these reforms that are being introduced actually address that problem? Or is it entirely political theatre designed to, respond to understandable outrage and fear in the public? Because, that's not how good laws are made, and that's not how you actually address problems. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so yes, this episode is coming out on January 25th. Tomorrow will be January 26th, aka Australia Day, aka Invasion Day. As I mentioned, Larissa, you very kindly joined us on the show around this time of year in 2024, obviously coming off the back of the defeat of the voice referendum. I think we briefly talked about the Australia Day change the date conversation, and I think we pretty much settled the position that it is a debate or conversation that is kind of stalled. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere much. It's kind of a frozen in time. And in the grand scheme of things, it is not the most important issue facing First Nations people or in the First Nations justice conversation. Of course, the cultural war happens every single year, and the outrage is wheeled out, and people saying that they're not doing certain things on January 26th and other people defending it. There was a Roy Morgan poll that came out that showed an increase of support. 72% of Australians now say the date should stay as Australia Day. That's up 3.5% from 2 years ago. Only 28%, down 3.5%, say January 26th should be called Invasion Day. An increased majority of Australians say Australia Day should not be moved from January 26th. 60% of people support it staying where it is. For the record, for the Greenies, we're on board. ALP supporters are fairly split on the issue as to whether or not Australia Day should stay on January 26th. That's up 5% point from 2 years ago, ALP supporters who support it staying there. In contrast, a clear majority of Green supporters are in favour of Jan 26 being known as Invasion Day rather than Australia Day, and 86% support changing the date as well. There will be rallies tomorrow. There was a brief talk about whether they would not happen as protest is somewhat criminalised in the beautiful state of New South Wales under these new laws that were passed in the wake of Bondi. They will be going ahead, and apparently the Nazis will be out and about too. March for Australia rallies are planned in the major cities across the country. Personally, I predict some ugly clashes, particularly in Melbourne, where the March for Australia stuff's happening on the Flinders Street steps. And of course, that's where the Invasion Day rally goes to. Anyway, that's all to say. How are you thinking about this? Does any of this sort of day stuff matter? Obviously, the issues that people march about and the calls for justice and First Nations justice that people make in those rallies on Jan 26 matter a lot. But yeah, how are you thinking about all that kind of cultural war carry on at the moment?
Cultural war is always there, and I understand in the kind of, where we've been over the last couple of years, why there is this, the debate is not about the date. And I think that, it plays too much in the culture war to get into that conversation. I think your response, like when I say to people that are listening to this, your response to people about, don't get into a fight about changing the date because you won't win it. Most of this country is in denial about the truth of this country. January 26, in a way that we have held this place, is about a day of truth-telling and talking about where this country is and where it is going and the truth of the history of this country. And so people can say, we don't want to call it an invasion day. I'm like, well, you are the only country in the world that celebrates your National Day on the day of invasion, so that's a you problem. The reality is you invaded this country on this day. That's the truth of the matter. And it is not a National Day celebration. If you are of the ilk of people who are like, I don't care, we know you don't care. But the reality is people march from all different races of people, communities across this country and listen to Aboriginal people on this day because we know this is not a national day. This is a day that tells First Nations people in this country, you don't matter, your history doesn't matter, and we are here to erase you. And so, I think they can talk about the polling and what people think. Go and measure the amount of people that turn up to Invasion Day, Survivor Day events and official Australia Day celebrations. It's getting very, very small. So I think like the actual sentiment, and when you actually get people to come out and think about, if they were to actually say, in the national Roy Morgan poll and not be so just playing into a culture war and trying to get easy media on the things that they're doing, go and ask Australians if they think what happened to First Nations people was fair. Because there is a very big split on that in favour of First Nations people. Go and ask Australians whether they think that the government should do something to right the wrongs and things that were done to Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. And you will see that landslide in support. So you can hold these kind of two views in your head at the same time. And what's important is when we just talk about the hate speech laws, what we're trying to engage this country in is a conversation about where we're at and where we're going, because we need to have really big structural change in this country. And this is the way that we do it. And this is the way that we succeed in getting there. things like what we've seen in Victoria last year, and I know we'll talk about it maybe a bit more, but like we would not be in a space where the first treaty in this country was signed if there wasn't for hundreds of thousands of people in this country that are turning out and demonstrating that they want something else with us. So, and solidarity is incredibly important when I think about part of where we are at and the apathy and inaction that we're seeing from so many governments. I understand that it's scary, but it's scarier for our communities to be out on Invasion Day by ourselves. So I would say this Invasion Day, don't worry about the debate and posting on social media. Please turn out and stand with our communities, because our communities have to turn out on this day. We have to. We can't just go home.
Yeah. I mean, it is, think about it, like it is the platform and a time when, at least in a way, it might not be a great form of attention, but at least the country does somewhat pay attention to the fight for First Nations justice. I think that'd be fair to say. You know, NAIDOC Week is a celebration. Other days on the calendar that are tied to the history of First Nations justice or calls for First Nations justice, I think it'd be fair to say do not get anywhere in amount the same attention that they deserve or that we would see on January 26th. So yes, I'm sure there are lots of people, including First Nations people, who are marching tomorrow who might have various positions on the date, changing the date, how much they care about the date debate whatsoever, but who are completely committed to a better deal for First Nations people in this country and will use that platform and that space to say, this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is our fucking country, and listen to us because there's a whole lot of shit that isn't fixed yet.
And like, you know, I come in and listen to just one of the things that is horrific and like has really, I guess, taken them, you know, just there's some things that like you see terrible shit happening, but like the rise in deaths in custody is something that is just so far at the forefront of communities right now and what has happened over the last year. And we're seeing you know, we had the NT and Queensland election campaigns and just incredible racist campaigns around crime and criminalisation of our communities. And that has metastasized into deaths in custody. That is the only way you can look at that. Our communities are really unsafe. You know, they're passing laws in the Northern Territory to give people mace. Like, and you're seeing this vigilante violence perpetuated at our kids. And one of the other things that I say around, like even around the criminalisation and hate speech laws, is you're giving social license around to police around how they can behave around our communities as well. And being of suspicion, like I could list, and I don't want to do it, I could list the amount of, you know, young Aboriginal men, or not even men and boys, that have been killed because they have been pursued by police without committing any crime. They have been pursued by vigilantes and people who, you know, want to have a go at Aboriginal people because they feel aggrieved on something or I think some blackfellow did something to them and they kill a young blackfellow. And that happened just in the last couple of months. So this rhetoric, you know, there's a reality around what it means for our communities. And right now, I even think, and like I fully support the amount of space that is being given to the genocide within Gaza, but it has, I do, you know, for the left, I think you need to hold the complexity around what is happening in your solidarity with First Nations people, and you can do both things. But I see, you know, there's probably been a lot less of the left turning out for us, and I think there's things where rallies, there's a lot of exhaustion. We really ask you to turn out with us on this one day. And I think that is the most important thing. The amount of work that has happened from organisers to make sure these rallies have been able to go ahead across the country has been an incredible fallout, has included a lot of legal action because our communities need to hold this government accountable and we need the solidarity in that action as well.
Yeah, how closely have you followed the situation in Victoria and that treaty? I mean, yeah, pretty massive win in a whole bunch of ways, even symbolically, which is not nothing, but also the potential material outcomes that could lead from it. It was, of course, announced at pretty much the same time as the Victorian state government announced laws to send young people to prison for life and buying into that tough on crime, adult time bullshit. But yeah, do you see in Victoria a model for other states and territories or the rest of the country and the treaty movement?
Yeah, I do. I think that, you know, I think we are absolutely within our treaty era. There's a lot of work that has to happen here. The work that we do, so Common Threads runs the Together for Treaty campaign. That is about a social license campaign that needs to work alongside the negotiations and consultation with our communities. And like treaties need to be self-determined. And one of the things I want to say with Victorian treaty, like it's something that hasn't come out of nowhere. Actually, a lot of the processes went through 2 Victorian elections. But I think when you really think about what's happened within treaty and the enormous amount of work and a lot of people like, well, the criminalisation and the laws that passed in Victoria at the same time, Vic Treaty, like governments are always going to do things that hurt our communities. The thing to say about Vic Treaty is this is not something that the government has given black elders in Victoria. Like this is not something that's just been of their making. Like here's the reparations for what we've done to you. In every way that this process started in 2016 has been led by grassroots community around, originally what was the original constitutional recognition, which was 5 words in the Constitution, adding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to the preamble. And Victoria said, no, we don't want that. We want a treaty. And they have worked, and in some ways, in what I know, they have dragged this government in Victoria kicking and screaming to the table. And what they have created, yes, it's not done because you can't do it all within one negotiation. It's set out a proposal around how they negotiate. But really incredibly, they have created a lot of structural change in the way that Victorian governments operate with First Nations people. And, I think the Victorian election that comes up at the end of this year is going to be incredibly important because it needs to survive an election. But this is a political, the First People's Assembly in Victoria is a new democratic institution. It's been around. It's been through 2 elections. They're going through a lot of elections in July. This is the type of structural change that we need. It's going to look different across the country. We know at the moment, very quietly, for a lot of reasons, New South Wales is going through community consultations around what mob want. In South Australia, you have the 3rd anniversary of the Voice. You know that they're moving into wanting to look at treaties and what that agreement making is going to look like. There's a lot of work that needs to come from our communities first around what that looks like. And in Queensland and Victoria and the Northern Territory, they've taken off the table. Could talk about WA, but I'm not talking about WA. We'll get there. But this legislation, these are legislative reforms. They require the support and enough knowledge from the community to understand you don't get to be a policy in the detail of it and in negotiation of it, but you absolutely need to back into the social license around why this legislation needs to exist. And simply, the government has made many laws that have hurt our communities, that have led to the just unexcusable amount of disadvantage and death and disruption in our communities. And we deserve justice. And this is the big project around January 26th. But as we step into this era around the big picture and the structural change, what's on the horizon for our communities, it has taken us nearly 40 years to get to this point in the treaty and just see the first one. And absolutely, this is going to be the momentum in this country. So I think there is a point of you need to stick with this movement. If you're not paying attention to the treaty, you really need to get educated. I would say to everyone, go and listen to the co-chairs, Griffin and Nagara, and the speech that they gave in Parliament, because it really does succinctly talk about why treaty. And they were just brilliant speeches in terms of where we're going in this country. And I think just the incredible articulation around what justice means for First Nations people and what our aspirations are. And I think that should be required listening to any lefty that's thinking about this process and what it means and where we're going. Just listen to that and listen to people that are out there who talk to thousands of them across Victoria. We need to focus on this, and we need the solidarity of the movement to focus on this. We need the solidarity of philanthropy to focus on this. It can't be a government process because we don't have power in that process. So we need more support around that. We need everyday kind of average people to come out and say that, yeah, we back trees. And we actually know when you poll trees, treaty is because of your unity and the cultural capital that it carries. A lot of Australians don't know exactly what it is, but there's support for treaty. There's still support for treaty. It's still overwhelmingly people are unsure or they support it or they're unsure, which means we have a lot of room to fill around what this thing is, and we can start with people saying yeah, I support it. And I think that it's a good thing that Victory has been signed.
It's a great song. It's a real banger. It really captured the spirit. Even as I don't know the details of what this is, but this song rules and they seem to be pretty reasonable people, so I'm on board.
So good. No, I think they're also like, we could also maybe get a public holiday in there. Someone talked to Alvin Mosley, legislate one.
Treaty Day. Hell yeah.
Treaty Day. We should do it.
Last question for you, Larissa. I know that, climate action is a massive issue for you. And if we're talking about looking ahead to the year that's coming up, yes. How are you feeling about the state of Australia's approach to climate action? Through the prism of First Nations justice and the connections between the climate justice movement and First Nations justice, or more generally, what are you thinking about the climate agenda for 2026?
It's funny because I always think about this time of year, like when we're coming into this space of truth telling and, getting ready to get on the streets for January 26th and the debate that's around it and the cultural war that's over here being a little shit back. But like, we're in a space of like climate disasters as well. I'm just like, so like, country is also on our side. Like, you fucked up, you just see things right. But you laugh.
Yeah, if you guys could talk to country, that'd be great. If you could just sort out and please stop the fires and the floods and stuff, we'd really appreciate it. We colonizing whiteys would really appreciate it if you could.
But it's and it's evidence of the relationship that needs to exist for people to survive on this land as well. Like, I think that when we think about, it was part of the catalyst for me actually. I was originally co-founder of the Seed Indigenous Youth Climate Network. Moved over to GetUp because I wanted to work on, and climate change is such a Western framework, but how we look after country and how, our communities are able to remain on country. And I think we need to not lose focus in this. Like, even within the climate risk report that came out at last year, I'm sure you talked about it, but like, it says very clearly to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Northern Australia, Western New South Wales, it says within 10 to 15 years, you will be leaving the country unless we limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Bowen came out last year and said, we're going to hit the 2030 target, we're not going to hit 2035. And I think we need to get serious about what that means. I think we need to focus on the energy transition, but the reality is we have no plan for a phase out of fossil fuels. And we need to think about that from an economic standpoint. We also have these idiots in the coalition and the opposition saying, we're not going to make net zero, so let's just walk away from it. Like, okay, that's a good plan, dickheads. If it's your house that you lose, like, this country's about to be uninsurable and you're walking away from this, you're insane. These people don't deserve to get elected, but also, it also is about who's in there making decisions. I don't think we have enough of the right people who are really thinking about the kind of catastrophic climate. Like, we are in a space of ecological collapse, and I think we need to think about, in terms of the work that we're doing, not just focusing on mitigation. Obviously, we need to keep on the energy transition. We need to really get a plan around phase out of fossil fuels. This is the last parliament that can do anything about it. This is the last parliament that can limit us to 1.5. And so the work that we've been doing at Common Threads is really getting out on country and having conversations right across regions around what it means to adapt, what it means to think about mitigation. Also, renewable energy is really important, but we need to have a serious conversation about critical minerals in this country and what the extraction of that looks like, what it means for communities and their water, and also their health. Like, the reality is critical minerals are mined, 90% of them come out of China, and the refining resources exist there. They call those communities cancer communities. Like, you need to understand this is a new form of mining. This is a form of mining that is actually quite bad for our health and our environment as well. We need to see the renewable energy transition, but we have to hold the line on creating sacrifice zones as well. So there is a piece around, I think, the challenge we have around consumption and energy and what we're thinking about within this country needs to be brought to the forefront of the conversation. There's a lot of conversations we can have all at once. And if we kind of move outside this just technocratic energy, how much the cost of it, all this sort of stuff framework, and think about justice and our communities and how we live within this country. And like, that's a bigger project. It's not just about climate. It's the exact type of systemic change. And when we need to talk about leadership, we need to combat racism in this country. So I think that for us, we're working on building a campaign and project that really looks at what our communities need to remain, because that is our absolute objective here, is that we're not leaving country. We know how much pain and anguish that has caused our communities. And, it's not okay to just think that our communities can leave and then this will come in behind you and do all these things. Like, it's not it. And so I think where climate sits within this, I don't think there's any people that are thinking that climate change, like there's not very many people in this country that think that climate change isn't real. But I think there's still a lot of people that maybe think that there's nothing we can do about it. And sliding into that space is really going to let a lot of politicians off the hook and make a lot of billionaires even richer. So I think that there's work to do there around the advocacy there. And it's difficult, right? Like communities across the country, like we've just seen what happened in Victoria. We know what the projections look like in New South Wales and Queensland this year. You can't expect our communities to just continue to rebuild. So, but also, we don't want to just like, I feel this at home. I grew up in Lismore, and I think it's something that people just focus on the floods there. And it's like, why don't you leave? And it's like, we're not leaving country. We need to think about this, like how we work with the country, how we have politicians that actually take the action that's required in this crisis.
Okay, but apart from all that, we're fine, right? Larissa Baldwin-Roberts, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. commonthreads.org.au is the place to go to find out more about the organisations Larissa is with these days. Yeah, please.
We have on the 20th and 21st of February, so I just thought about this, the Together for Treaty National Summit. So go to togetherfortreaty.org. If you want to get involved in the campaign and the social movement, come down to Melbourne. We're going to have an incredible 2-day training with mob and non-Indigenous people. So sign up. It's free. Come. We'll give you a feed.
Awesome. What was that website again? Sorry?
Together for Treaty. You'll see it on our socials, togetherfortreaty.org.au.
Love it. Yes, and of course, turn out on January 26th, stand in solidarity with First Nations Australians, and let's, fucking get it done. And be careful if you do that, particularly if there are Nazis and fascists and nationalists kicking around trying to cause trouble. Just look after yourself and each other. But thank you very much, Larissa. Great to see you again, mate. Have a good year.
Thanks for having me.